All right. Let's talk a little bit about this, Keith. Since we just went through all of the
Yeah.
gymnastics that had to be undertaken in
And
order
this
to
guy
make
was
this trade.
involved
Right.
in the
Right. So
trade.
yeah, exactly. And so what do we think here? Tim Connolly, who again was involved in this deal, said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially said that there's some unintended consequences that came with the CBA. We've talked about this a lot. We've on this show over the years, we've talked about this. How whenever a change is made, there's oftentimes unintended consequences. There's things that the league doesn't foresee that will come up. Tim Connolly essentially said, that there have been some unintended consequences, that making trades under the new CBA has been very, very difficult. Again,
Tim Connolly, Wolves front office leader,
yes,
for those who don't know.
correct. So, and I should note that people will say, well, yeah, but he just got a trade done. Yes, but look what it took to get a trade done. Look at everything they had to go through to get a trade done. Because there's the general response, especially coming from the Lakers' perspective. A lot of people say, oh, well, other teams are making trades. Rob Pelinka is just an idiot. He's making excuses when he says the CBA is difficult. No, like the new CBA really is very, very difficult to make trades. And now we're starting to hear more and more. I believe there was something from the Jazz recently too, where teams are lamenting that there's just not as many trade opportunities as there used to be, that the new CBA has shut down a lot of that. I said this before the new CBA came into effect, Keith. We were talking about, I was concerned that they went too far, that they restricted stuff too much. You and I both are in agreement that the whole, you have to take back less salary than you send out in a trade, that should be a second tier apron issue and not a first tier apron issue. The way it is, I think it restricts trading too much and it creates some of the problems we saw in this Knicks trade. So I guess the big question is, as we're starting to hear more and more GMs speak up about this and say, yes, this has been a problem. What does it take to fix? At what point can the NBA say, yeah, okay, we probably blew it here. Let's tweak this a little bit. What point can they start to do that?
Yeah. So the NBA themselves, by themselves, at no point. It would have to be negotiated with the NBPA. Now, let's say
because
the
it's
NBA
collective
is like,
bargaining
correct.
agreement. It's right.
This is under the this is not so there's two different parts to the way the NBA runs with this stuff. There is the CBA. Then there's also what's called the NBA operations manual. This is CBA. This is written in the CBA. These rules are covered in the CBA. This is not an operations manual thing. The operations manual is a slightly different thing that covers off on other stuff, but this is a CBA topic. So in order to change it, so let's say today Adam Silver's like, dude, this Wolves Knicks trade was bonkers. We got to make this easier for the teams. And all his owners are like, yeah, let's make it easier for us. The NBPA is going to be like, cool, what do we get for agreeing to this, right? Like, because it's maybe they may say, yeah, we agree. We'll play ball because one, it would facilitate more movement for our players if they want to be somewhere else and blah, blah, blah. So maybe it's an easy thing. So there is in every collective bargaining agreement ever written, there is what is called a side letter or amendment process to that. So what that generally means is it's exactly for this type of thing. Holy crap, this is not doing what we thought it was. Or we have reinterpreted something or whatever it is. This one, I think, would be covered under the first of the, whoops, this didn't work the way we wanted. And both sides can agree to amend it. And you don't have to rip up the CBA and start anew. You don't even necessarily need to say, well, it is this way for the next 6 years, and we'll talk about it then. You can amend the CBA. Most best example I can give to the amended CBA, COVID seasons. They amended large chunks of the CBA because that's the only way you could make it work, right? We would not have had the bubble season, nor probably the season after the way we had them, had they not stepped in and said, we're going to completely amend large chunks of the CBA.
You have to be able to do that to react to stuff as things change, because otherwise, if you're just, okay, we're under the CBA for 5 years, oh my gosh, COVID, well, we're stuck for 5 years. We can't do anything. Then then that's a big problem.
You kill your sport. Yeah, that'd be it. You'd be done. So obviously, this is nowhere near that level, and I wasn't making that comparison. I was simply making that as a point to it can be done. And one of the things that was done even after we started playing, if you remember, hardship contracts can now be signed as 10-day deals. Like that was never a thing before, unless you were past the 10-day opening period for that. So now we're in a position where they could do this. They could sit down and say, like you and I are in agreement. Hey, this dollar for dollar matching, let that trigger a second apron hard cap. Triggering the first apron hard cap, it's just too much. You've made it very hard. Now, what I think the league might push back and say is, yet a team dealing with a second apron hard cap, a team that is so far over the second apron they can't even see it, they found a way to get a deal done. Get to work, get creative, figure out a way. I do think if you get enough teams, and one of the first real tests of this will be trade season this year. If we get just a dud of a trade deadline because now the Hornets of the world don't exist and the extra roster spots and teams, we've only got the Pistons with about 10 million in cap space. So you just don't have those facilitator teams like you normally do available.
Mm-hmm.
If we get to that point and like there's like no trades made and people are like, well, I wanted to trade this guy or I wanted to, reinforce the roster or whatever, I think you may start to get a little bit of noise going into next summer. I don't think they'd change it for next season, but you would start the process of, hey, do we want to look at this? What do we want to do? And then maybe for the like 26-27 season, maybe they do it. There's also one other thing that's going to happen here within the next few years. That's Sam Presti was the one who touched on this. Sam Presti basically came on and said, look, I know everybody's all fired up for expansion, but just throw the current expansion rules away because if you literally look in the CBA, do you know what it says under like the expansion rules outside of like what the salary cap set at? Refer to the prior CBA. Refer to the prior CBA. Refer to the prior CBA all the way back to 1995 when the Grizzlies
because they're like, we're not going to expand this time anyway, so let's not deal with all this. Just
and if we do, we're just going to do what we did last time. So
right.
Sam Presti's basically been like, now Sam Presti also has like 15 dudes he likes on his roster. He doesn't want to lose anybody. He doesn't want to leave anybody unprotected, blah, blah, blah. So, but for him, he's like, we got to change these rules. Like the league is not in the same place. Like we have built these things up. I think what we are more likely to see is not a brand new CBA, but major amendments made to the expansion process. And thus that becomes the vehicle to enter into, hey, let's tweak some of these trade rules and apron rules and some of the other things that aren't working. Because by then, too, we'll have a few seasons of data, right? We'll have had several transaction cycles to look at because the NBA is not reactive like that. They're not going to be like, hey, a couple people think it's hard. Like we can't. It did what it was supposed to do. We don't have the Warriors, the Clippers, and the Nets anymore. Now they've been kind of replaced by the Celtics and the Suns and the Wolves and the Bucks, but in a different way. But I think for the league, it's a little more like, hey, this kind of worked. So let's give it a couple more cycles. But I think that's your vehicle into let's tweak and change things a little bit is when we have to kind of redo or at the bare minimum, re-clarify some rules for expansion.
Yeah, that would be the time to do it, I think. I think if we get to, because look, there's no question, I've talked a lot about this. The league has enjoyed the news cycle that it creates. The fact that it's almost a 365-day a year news cycle. Yes, August and September, which part of why they're my least favorite months, it gets a little dry during those times. But otherwise, I mean, the NBA offseason sometimes generates more interest than the NBA season, right? We have more people checking in July to see what's happening in free agency, to see what's happening on the trade market. There's always a spike of interest around the trade deadline as well. I don't think the NBA ultimately just, big picture, beyond teams being able to make moves, in terms of fan engagement, I don't think they want to restrict trading so much because every time there's a big trade, you get whoa, what's going on in the NBA? Everybody, let's pay attention to that. You get that type of effect. And by doing things that have general managers saying, there's way less opportunities to make trades than there were before. This is a problem. I think if this is something that perpetuates, especially if we get like a down trade deadline. Remember the 1 year, it was over 10 years ago at this point, where it was like there were like 4 trades or something like, and they were all
like Alexi Shved was like the biggest name that moved. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't anything noteworthy. If we get a trade deadline like that this year, on top of so many general managers now started to speak out about how difficult things have been. Now that's of course coming off of the Karl Anthony Towns trade, the big whoa, can't believe this happened trade. But still, as if this voice that we keep hearing from now different general managers around the league saying maybe we messed up here, if that starts to get louder and louder, and then we get kind of a dud of a trade deadline, maybe this starts to become more and more of a thing. Next summer they'll start looking into it or something like that. But I think you're right. I think ultimately they probably want to see a little bit more data, get a little bit more time in with this one. But so far, you're starting to get the sense that maybe some of our fears about the new CBA are being realized.
Yeah, I wrote about this a little. I wrote about it in that big piece about the cat trade, but I also tweeted this. It does just go to show it's not impossible, right? The
Sure.
Knicks and Wolves made
Life
it
finds a
work.
way.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to go too crazy. I'm very much, with me, I would rather I want to see something happen before
Sure.
I, start getting too reactionary to things that haven't played out. But yeah, I'm with you. If like me and you are doing a 3-hour live show on trade deadline day and we're spend 2 hours and 35 minutes of it complaining about the lack of trades and the rest talking about Marvel movies, then that's not what we want, right? That's no
No.
good. So, and now, right, there's going to be other people that are going to be like, oh, God forbid the NBA, the National Basketball Association, be about basketball instead of trades and transactions. But the league knows where a significant chunk of their bread is buttered.
Yep.
Right. It is it's on the transaction game. And look at we just spend half this show or more breaking down the cat trade because of that way. So yeah, we're gonna see. But yeah, I found it very interesting too. Like you did there. You've got some of these GMs that are kind of out here. I think they're at least setting the stage for we probably need to think about this a little bit more.
At least have the
So,
conversation.
yeah. And
Yeah.
Tim Connolly himself used your favorite your favorite phrase, unintended consequences. Like
Unintended consequences.
he,
Yep.
he did, yeah. So it's yeah,
There's always going to be.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can't, it's just, what is it? The best laid plans of mice and men, right?
Yeah.
It's, or my dad, one of his favorite phrases is man plans, God laughs, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just kind of how it goes. So,
I mean, when you look at just what happened in the market this summer, I don't know that the NBA's plan was to squeeze players so much that the Lonnie Walkers of the world are getting Exhibit 10 deals and things, and teams are going, no, we're just going to hang on to our mid-level exception. We'll hang on to it for trade purposes till midseason. I liked the idea of being able to hang on to your mid-level exception and being able to use it to absorb salaries in a trade. But then you also had an excuse for teams to say, okay, well, cool. Well, we're just not going to use it then. And we can say, we're going to wait until a trade comes up at the trade deadline to use it. And then if it doesn't come up, oh, it just didn't come up. That's not on us. Oops. And then
yeah,
meanwhile, you've got players who probably normally would have gotten some of that money. Gary Trent
sure.
Jr. signing on a minimum, Torian Prince signing on a minimum,
Yeah.
guys who normally would have gotten that money that teams weren't willing to spend it. So was that something that the league foresaw? Probably not. They probably didn't expect this. And I'm not saying that's good or bad the way this played out. Just saying there's always going to be, regardless of what you do and add in, even something that we thought, oh, this is really cool. Now you can use your mid-level exception in a different way. Oh, but look at what it's now created. Maybe that's something that could be an unintended consequence as well.
Yeah. I think there's a percentage that is the new CBA. But I think a larger percentage is half the league is at the luxury tax, and there
Yeah.
are another like 7 teams that are within 5 million of the luxury tax, which 5 million is kind of it's historically been kind of the loose of like, all right, we can get out of this if we need to number. So you're talking roughly 2/3 of the league is at the tax or within range of being a tax team. That's not the new CBA. That is just they've extended a lot of guys over recent years to a lot of money. And so some of this is new CBA driven, sure, but it's probably more, in my opinion, it's more like 60-40, maybe even as high as like 75-25, where it's just they're sitting on a lot of money right now. I was talking to an agent yesterday in the aftermath of all the cat stuff, and he was like, yeah, he goes, I think a lot of people have missed. This was going to happen anyway. Even if we just said keep rolling with the CBA as it was, this year, next year, teams just have so much money on the books. That's why
Yeah.
people are like, but the cap's going way up. Why are there not 10 teams with cap space? It's because teams have a lot of money that they're already sitting on. And now the CBA part of that is it's a little more punitive if you go way over the tax with the different apron restrictions and the like. So there's a balancing act there for sure. And we're gonna figure it out. But again, we can't, no one's gonna blow up the system over one off season. Everybody's really gonna be like, we need to kind of let this play out a little bit more. And then really see what does this look like.
All right. Well, we'll see. Just something to keep an eye on.
Sure.
As we move forward under the new CBA, we'll continue to keep tabs on, kind of how things are going. Because what we do here, we keep an eye on how the new CBA is working. We look at how the trade situation is working, how the whole market works around the NBA. One of the things, of course, that we cover here. So we'll continue to keep tabs on that.